As she sat in her living room, Sharon Newman gazed intently at the blazing embers that were present in the fireplace. One of those few occasions when her life was not a hectic whirlwind, it was a beautiful and peaceful evening. This peace should have seemed like a win after so many years of drama, including affairs, heartbreaks, issues with mental health, and custody fights. However, it did not. Sharon's sense of unease had been growing for some weeks now, and it felt like a storm was brewing on the horizon. It was as if the cosmos was trying to tell her that the period of tranquility she had been experiencing was about to come to an end. In addition, the warnings had begun to materialize, just as they had done every time. It had started to happen that mysterious letters were being left at Crimson Lights, the coffee house that she owned, and even on her porch. It was the words that sent shivers down her spine each time she read them. You can't hide from your past. The words were unsettling. Sharon initially believed that it was some terrible joke, someone playing on her lengthy and infamous past in Genoa City. She had felt that it was a sick joke. The messages, however, got more persistent, and they started to delve deeper into her history, revealing things that no one outside of her close circle of friends and family should be aware of. She was now holding the most recent note in her hands, which were shaking. "Meet me at the cabin," was the message that was the most straightforward to date. "You are aware of the one." Sharon's thoughts immediately went back to the cabin. There were secrets, betrayals, and even deaths that had occurred there. It was the place where she and Adam Newman had concealed themselves from the rest of the world, where they had enjoyed moments that remained incomprehensible to anybody else. But it was also the place where danger had been hiding. A shade of darkness cast by Cameron Kirsten lingered over that location. When Sharon thought about him, she felt a chill run down her spine. Was it possible that he was the one who made these threats? Sharon was not the type of person to back down from a confrontation, despite the fact that her gut warned her that coming to the cabin would only result in trouble. She was aware that she had to confront whatever it was head-on or run the risk of being tormented by it for the rest of her life. She quickly grabbed her keys and her coat. This was the price that she was prepared to pay in order to finally put her past behind her and move on with her life. On the other side of town, Daniel Romalotti was sitting at the table in his flat, staring blankly at the light that was flickering above him. He was divided between his love for his family and the dread that he was about to lose them. His mind was a jumble, to say the least. His daughter, Lucy, was becoming more distant, and his mother, Phyllis Summers, had been going through a downward spiral for several weeks at this point. When Phyllis finally made it back to Genoa City, things had not gone smoothly at all. It seemed as though she had been embroiled in a scandal after another ever since she had returned. On the other hand, it felt different this time. It wasn't just that Phyllis was becoming embroiled in petty plots. She was also playing a hazardous game with some powerful individuals, and it was beginning to ruin everything that Daniel had worked so hard to rebuild. He had re-established a relationship with Lucy after a period of time during which they had been estranged, and the last thing he desired was for Phyllis's unpredictable conduct to destroy that connection. Nevertheless, it was becoming increasingly obvious that she was ensnaring him in her most recent web of deception and deceit. Before phoning a number that he hadn't called in a very long time, he reached for his phone and hesitated for a second before answering the call. "What about Christine?" Daniel remarked as she picked up the phone. The strain of his voice was a result of the weight of the problems he was experiencing. "I ask for your assistance." Daniel's relationship with Christine Blair had always been more than that of a lawyer, a friend, a confidant, and someone who had always watched out for him when things became difficult. She was someone he could always count on. And now, as Daniel found himself slipping downward, Christine was the only person he could think of who might be able to pull him back from the brink of insanity. The words "I'm on the next flight" were spoken by Christine without any hesitation. "Hold on to your hat, Daniel. We will figure this out together," she said. At precisely the moment when the moon was beginning to rise above the treetops, Sharon arrived at the cabin. She felt a sense of horror rush over her as she caught sight of the old wooden structure being constructed. The silence that pervaded the entire place was frightening. Nothing, not even the chirping of crickets, could be heard to break the silence that prevailed throughout the night. It was when she went inside that she felt her heart pounding in her chest and the sound of the hardwood flooring cracking beneath her feet. The atmosphere in the cabin was dense with memories that she had been trying to forget for a very long time. She was tempted to turn around and leave for a brief minute, but the sound of a door closing behind her stopped her in her tracks and prevented her from exiting the room. "Sharon," she said. As she heard the voice, a shiver ran down her spine. It was rich, velvety, and utterly recognizable all at the same time. "What's up, Cameron?" Sharon turned her back on him and mumbled something, her voice barely audible as she did so. He was standing there, as ominous and unruffled as he had always been. Cameron Kirsten, the man who had followed her and harassed her, was the particular individual who she had believed she would never have to encounter again. How had he managed to escape from the prison? What was his reason for being here, in the very location where their twisted story had been told in the past? Cameron replied, "It's been a long time," as he moved closer to her and his icy eyes locked into hers during the conversation. Sharon retreated a step, her thoughts racing as she did so. Where did he get out of there? Following all of these years, why was he focusing his attention on her now? "Cameron, what is it that you look for?" she demanded, making an effort to maintain her composure despite the fact that terror had already begun to take hold. The words, "I want you to pay for what you did to me," came out of his mouth with a tone that was oozing with hate. The urge to breathe became stuck in Sharon's throat. Since the previous time they had met, she had been through hell and back, but this was a different situation. It was necessary for her to outwit him this time. It was no longer the frail woman that she had been in the past. On the other hand, the threat was very real, and Cameron was not going to give up until he achieved his goal. Christine's return to Genoa City is the subject of Chapter 4. The moment Christine Blair stepped off the plane at the airport in Genoa City, she was overcome with a sense of melancholy as she made her way through the terminal that she had been familiar with. She had devoted a significant portion of her life to this location, helping to resolve cases, protecting those she cared about, and navigating the complex world of Genoa City's most prominent citizens. The experience of returning always brought about a range of feelings, but this time it was different. She was here to assist Daniel this time, and she would not stop working until she had accomplished her goal. She went to Daniel's place, where he greeted her with a bare embrace the moment she walked through the door. His eyes seemed to be filled with the burden of the entire world, and Christine could see it in his expression. "I am so happy that you are here," Daniel replied with a strained tone in his voice. To which Christine responded, "I wouldn't be anywhere else," as she entered the building. The tension that was hanging in the air made the flat feel heavy, despite the fact that it was clean. The fact that Daniel was on the verge of breaking down was obvious to Christine. Daniel admitted to Christine, "I don't know what to do anymore," and his voice broke as he revealed his feelings. "I am terrified that everything is going to be destroyed because Mom has gotten herself involved with some really dangerous people," the speaker said. As Daniel detailed the problem, Christine listened attentively to every word he said. Phyllis had always been a wild card, but it appeared that she had passed a threshold that even Daniel could not forgive. There was no way that she could have been forgiven. He was being manipulated by her, and she was coercing him into a situation that had the potential to wreck his life, as well as his relationship with Lucy. "Daniel, I'll be here to assist you," Christine remarked in a forceful voice. "However, we must exercise caution with regard to this matter. The last thing we want is for Phyllis to bring you down with her." At the same time, they started working on a strategy together. In the meantime, Daniel would make an effort to keep his mother at bay, while Christine would utilize her experience in the law to investigate the specifics of Phyllis's transactions. Christine, however, was unable to shake the notion that there was something even more sinister hiding beneath the surface as they worked through their plan. After returning to the cabin, Sharon and Cameron engaged in a heated argument in the oppressive silence. Sharon's thoughts were racing as she attempted to come up with a way out of the situation, but Cameron was too close and too frightening. The only way for her to buy herself some time was to keep him talking. "Why do you ask, Cameron? What is the point of pursuing me once more after all this time?" Sharon inquired, maintaining a steady tone of voice despite the fear that was eating away at her soul. Cameron gave a sly grin as he leaned against the old wooden table that was located in the middle of the cabin. "Sharon, you believe that you have found a way to get away with everything, don't you?" You always seem to find yourself back on your feet, regardless of how many people you have caused harm to." Sharon's eyes narrowed in reaction. "I have not caused harm to anyone. It is you who would do that." Cameron interjected, his voice low and menacing, and said, "Who was locked away because of you." On the other hand, she said, "But I've had a lot of time to think in prison. Moreover, I came to a realization. What you've done has never really been compensated for by you." Sharon's heart was beating really fast. Cameron was dragging her back into a nightmare that she thought she had fled, but here he was, dragging her back into the nightmare she had believed she had left. As Sharon took a step back toward the exit, she spewed forth, "You are a delusional individual. I took the necessary steps to safeguard myself, and I did so." Cameron's eyes became more gloomy. "As soon as the facts is revealed, we will be able to determine the extent of that protection." In the instant when Sharon was about to speak, the entrance to the cabin suddenly opened, and a figure entered at that moment. Sharon felt her heart race. Was it a sign of assistance or another threat? But the moment she recognized the person, her blood became ice cold. His name was Adam Newman. In Sharon's life, Adam Newman had always been a mystery. He was a source of both intense passion and intolerable agony. When they were together, they had experienced everything, including love, betrayal, and secrets that had the potential to destroy both of them. Sharon experienced a peculiar mixture of relief and horror as she contemplated the sight of him now, in the precise location where so many things had gone wrong in the past. While his countenance was unreadable, Adam's gaze darted back and forth between Sharon and Cameron. It was obvious that he had had sufficient hearing to comprehend what was taking place. However, the question that remained was, whose side was he on? Sharon hushed herself and murmured, "Adam," her voice shaking. "What are you doing in this location?" Even though it was only for a brief moment, Adam's expression became more gentle, and a trace of concern could be seen passing over his features. Then, however, he shifted his focus to Cameron, and his eyes narrowed in concentration. The tone of Adam's voice was icy and resolute as he instructed Cameron, "This is between you and me. Please do not include Sharon in this." It was a dark and bitter sound that reverberated throughout the little cabin as Cameron laughed. "Oh, Adam," she said, "you always seem to be the one who comes out on top, don't you? On the other hand, you won't be able to save her this time." In preparation for a battle, Adam took a step forward while maintaining a stiff posture. It was the same danger that had once pulled Sharon to him, even though she knew it was wrong, and she could see it in his eyes. Sharon could feel the danger in his eyes. "Cameron, do you want to make amends for something?" The tone of Adam's voice was low and menacing as he announced, "Now let's put an end to this. Nevertheless, you do not touch her." Suddenly, Cameron's smile vanished, and it was replaced with a look of icy rage. "Is it not true that you have always been her savior and protector? However, nights are lost, Adam. You too will do the same." Cameron lunged for Adam before anybody else could respond, and within seconds, the two men were engaged in a fierce struggle with each other. The sight of their bodies colliding with furniture and sending splinters of wood flying across the room was a source of fear for Sharon as she watched them fight. "Stop!" Sharon let out a scream, but neither of them paid attention to her. While everything was in disarray, Cameron was able to strike a vicious punch, which caused Adam to fall backwards. Sharon was under the impression that Cameron was down for a brief period of time. However, Adam soon recovered and grabbed Cameron by the collar before throwing him against the wall. Taking a deep breath, Adam switched his attention to Sharon. Through clenched teeth, he uttered the word "Go." "Get out of this place, right now." The only moment of hesitation that Sharon exhibited was a split second before she whirled around and hurried out of the cabin, her pulse beating as she escaped into the darkness. Although she had no idea where she was headed, she was acutely aware that she needed to get as far away from that nightmare as she possibly could. In the meantime, Christine and Daniel had made some headway in their investigation into the actual circumstances surrounding Phyllis's most recent debacle. The fact that Phyllis had gotten herself connected with a dangerous gang of investors who were manipulating the stock market and engaged in illicit activities was something that they had learned about thanks to Christine's connections in the legal profession. Phyllis, Daniel, and Lucy were not the only ones who may be affected by the ramifications of this situation. It was far more serious than either of them had thought, and the consequences could be terrible. "She's in deep," Christine stated, shaking her head as she read over the paperwork that they had acquired. "She's definitely in trouble. In the event that this becomes public knowledge, it is not simply her reputation that is at stake. There is a possibility that she will serve a significant amount of time in prison." The documents that were in front of Daniel caused his face to become pale as he glanced at them. "I was aware that she was in a difficult situation, but I never expected that it would be this severe." He was comforted by Christine's hand, which she placed on his shoulder. "Don't worry, Daniel, we figured this out." That is always the case. Christine, however, was unable to shake the impression that something much more significant was taking place, even while she was speaking the words. When it came to danger, Phyllis was not the only one. The same was true for Daniel, and if they did not move quickly, he could end up losing everything. As Sharon made her way through the pitch-black forest, her breath came out in breathless gasps. The lights of Geno City could be seen flickering in the distance as she approached the edge of town, but she did not stop until she reached that point. Fear and confusion were whirling around in her head like a tornado. Adam had been able to save her, but at what expense? Was he going to make it through his battle with Cameron? Or had she simply abandoned him to struggle against a monster on his own? She did not have the time to locate the answer. The phone she was carrying in her pocket began to ring, and when she removed it, she discovered a message from an unknown number that read, "This is not over, Sharon." Indeed, not by a long shot. Her heart sunk to the floor. Whoever was responsible for this, whether it was Cameron or someone else, was not going to allow her to escape with such ease. It was the only person she knew she could rely on, and she had no other option but to go to them. During the same time period, Christine and Daniel were making preparations for a confrontation from their respective perspective. They were able to collect sufficient evidence to bring those individuals with whom Phyllis had become associated to justice. However, this would not be an easy task. The individuals in question were extremely strong and dangerous, and they would not hesitate to eliminate anyone who stood in their way. The tone of Christine's voice was solemn as she stated, "We need to be cautious about this. We can't afford to let them see us approaching." Daniel gave a slight nod, but his thoughts were elsewhere. The thought of Lucy kept running through his head. He couldn't stop thinking about how she had been caught in the middle of this mess, and how he had to protect her at whatever cost. Daniel's voice was hardly audible above a whisper as he expressed his desire for this situation to be resolved. Christine smiled at him in a way that was soothing. "Yes, it will be. Daniel, we will prevail over this challenge. That is always the case." However, Christine was unable to shake the impression that they were about to walk into a storm that they might not survive, even while she was speaking the words. Her heart was beating as she prepared to knock on the door of Adam Newman's penthouse the following morning, and Sharon found herself standing outside of the building. It was a mystery to her what she would discover when she opened that door. She had no idea whether Adam was still alive after his altercation with Cameron, whether he would assist her, or whether she would be on her own. Just as she was about to knock on the door, however, it suddenly opened, and there he was. Adam appeared to be exhausted and battered, but he appeared to be very much alive. When his eyes met hers, there was a brief pause in which neither of them spoke. Without uttering a single word, he moved to the side and led her to enter. Adam whispered, "I'm glad you came," and he meant it. Despite the tightness in her throat, Sharon gave a slight nod. It was difficult for her to find the words to express her gratitude to him for saving her life. In a manner that seemed to be reading her mind, Adam said, "You don't have to explain. I am aware." At the moment that Sharon glanced at him, tears began to well up in her eyes. Adam had never failed to be there for them when it counted the most, despite the fact that their past was fraught with complexities, and that they had caused each other discomfort. "It is imperative that we put a stop to him," Sharon eventually stated, her voice shaking. "Cameron, he is not going to give up until he achieves the results that he desires." Adam's jaw became more tense. We then put a halt to him, collectively. While all was going on, Christine and Daniel were getting ready to pull the trigger. A ruthless businessman by the name of Vincent Moore was the boss of the gang that Phyllis had been working with, and they had managed to hunt him down. However, obtaining his presence would not be a simple task because he was the key to bringing down the entire enterprise. Christine was aware that they were about to enter a potentially hazardous circumstance. Nonetheless, there was no way to turn back now. They would be putting Daniel's life and Lucy's future in jeopardy if they did not take action. Christine delivered the following statement with a forceful tone. "We go in, we get the evidence, and we get out." The phrase, "no risks, no mistakes." The moment they got closer to Vincent's office, however, Christine's heart began to speed. Even though she had been in a lot of high-pressure situations in the past, this one felt completely different. By doing so, it appeared as though they were walking into a trap. At the end of the day, everything was determined by a single instant. In the middle of Genoa City, Sharon and Adam stood together, prepared to confront whatever Cameron had in store for them regardless of the circumstances. Although they were aware that they were competing against a man who had nothing to lose, they were also aware that they could not allow him to prevail. At the same time, Christine and Daniel confronted Vincent, this time armed with the proof they required to bring him to justice. Christine had always been a warrior, and she was not going to back down now, despite the fact that it was a risky gamble. All of the things were hanging in the balance as the stress reached its highest point. People's lives would be altered and secrets would be divulged, but there was one thing that was certain. Nobody would emerge undamaged from the experience. Sharon was standing outside of Crimson Lights when the dust eventually settled, and the early morning sun was casting a gentle glow over the city. She had made it through. She had confronted her history, fought her demons, and emerged from the experience more powerful than she had ever been before. Still, as she sipped her coffee and watched the world go by, she couldn't escape the sensation that this was only the beginning of a new chapter in her life. The journey was not yet ended. There were still battles to be fought, mysteries to be discovered, and a long road ahead of them. However, for the time being, Sharon was willing to appreciate this present moment of tranquility, secure in the knowledge that she was prepared for whatever lay ahead of her. In the same way, Christine was standing on the brink of a fresh start. Despite the fact that she had assisted Daniel in navigating the storm, there were still obstacles to overcome. Christine was aware that their conflict was not yet over because Phyllis maintained her presence in the world and continued to be capable of generating mayhem. However, for the time being, Christine was prepared to go back to her house and ready to accept whatever the future held. And when the sun rose above Genoa City, both of the women were aware that they would confront whatever the future contained, no matter what it was, and they would do so together, more powerful than they had ever been before. Abbott Manor rose tall under Genoa City's dark clouds. Overnight, the estate got a fall chill. Jack Abbott's anxiety made the mansion feel as foreboding as the storm outside, but family tradition appeared to fight the cold. Jack alone in the parlor, his mind raced over recent and distant recollections. He had always been the Abbott family patriarch and protector. After his father died, Jack took on the responsibility of keeping the family together. Jeb thriving, and the Abbott brand standing for more than chaos. But Jack's world was falling apart today. The news was so unexpected and upsetting that he couldn't believe it or consider how it would affect the family. He understood Tracy needed to be spoken to first. She had always been the family's heart, calming storms, listening with an open heart, and offering perspective when Jack couldn't see past his emotions. But how could he tell her? How could he explain the news that shattered him? Little knock disturbed his thoughts. Jack looked up to see Tracy at the doorway, her sweet grin contrasting with the upcoming conversation. "Jack, you wanted to talk?" Tracy inquired, warmly and concerned. Jack stood and waited for her to join him, losing his serenity. "Yes, Trace, we must talk. We care about family." Tracy sat on the couch, frowning at Jack's seriousness. Over the years, she had watched her brother face hostile takeovers, personal betrayals, and failed romances. But this was different. Jack's eyes showed a terror she hadn't seen since childhood. "Jack, you're scaring me," she whispered. "What's going on?" Jack hesitated, unable to speak. How could he disclose his discoveries without destroying their family's identity? He discovered a dark, twisted truth that challenged everything the Abbotts stood for. He breathed deeply and sat across from her with his hands clasped. "Tracy, I don't even know where to start, but I found something that could change everything we know about our family. About Dad, about our history, about us." Tracy's eyes widened, heart skipping. What do you mean? What did you find? Jack left his seat and went to the corner antique cabinet. He opened the drawer and brought out a manila envelope full with documents carefully compiled over the preceding few days. Hand trembling, he gave it to her. This is going to sound insane, but it looks like Dad had secrets. Big ones, and they've been buried for decades. Anxiety gripped Tracy as she glanced at the packet in her lap. Their father, John Abbott, was always complicated, she knew. But secrets? Large enough to upend their family? What kind of secrets, Jack? She murmured, fearing what she may hear. Jack sat alongside her, staring at the envelope as if it held the key to a Pandora's box he wanted to close. It's about a woman from Dad's past. A woman who might have had a child with him. A child we never knew about. Tracy gasped and reached for her mouth. A child? You mean, we might have a sibling? Jack nodded slowly, grimly. That's what the evidence suggests. Chapter 3. Mystery Unveiled. Jack's remarks suffocated the Abbott living room's warmth. As Tracy flipped through the envelope's paperwork, her mind raced and her hands shook. Each page revealed parts of a story she had never imagined, so different from her father. How did you find out about this, Jack? She whispered. Jack scratched his temples, anxious in every step. It started a few weeks ago when I received an anonymous letter. At first, I thought it was some sort of cruel prank, someone trying to stir up trouble, given our family's public stature. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized there might be some truth to it. I hired a private investigator and, well, the trail led here. To these documents. Tracy's head spun. They always admired their father's integrity. How could he hide this? Tracy remarked. But Jack, this doesn't make sense, shaking her head. Dad was always so open with us about his life, his past. Why would he keep something like this a secret? And who is this woman? Jack sighed, reclined on the couch. Her name was Catherine Weaver. She was someone Dad knew before he met Mom. Apparently, they had a relationship for a while, but it ended when Dad chose to focus on building Jebat. The timeline suggests that she left Geno City shortly after, and she may have been pregnant when she left. A stomach knot formed in Tracy. Do we know if she had the child, or if the child survived? Jack shook his head. That's the thing, Tracy. We don't know for sure. There are records suggesting that Catherine did give birth, but there's no mention of what happened to the baby. It's like the child vanished after that. Tracy's heart hurt at the possibilities. Could it be that the child was given up for adoption, or raised by someone else without us ever knowing? Maybe, Jack said, but the more I dig, the murkier it gets. There are gaps in the records, missing pieces that don't add up. It feels like someone's been trying to cover this up for years. Tracy swallowed hard, crying. And what if this child is still out there, Jack? What if we have a sibling who's been living their entire life not knowing who they are, not knowing that they're an Abbott? Tracy was always the family's heart, seeing the good in others and uniting them. However, this knowledge shattered her. She felt hollow thinking that they might have another sibling who had been rejected by the Abbott family. We have to find out the truth, Jack, Tracy replied, determined. We can't let this stay buried. If there's someone out there who's part of our family, we owe it to them, and to Dad, to find them. Jack nodded, but his eyes showed hesitation. I agree, Tracy, but I'm worried about what we might uncover. This could change everything for us. Jebat, our family, everything we've built. We've worked so hard to keep this family together after everything that's happened over the years. I just don't know if we're ready for this. Tracy comforted Jack by touching his arm. We've survived worse, Jack. We've faced loss, betrayal, and scandal before. But we've always come through it stronger. Whatever the truth is, we'll face it together. We owe it to Dad and to each other. Jack gazed at his sister, appreciative for her unfailing support. He always respected Tracy's fortitude and ability to see the light in tough circumstances. She could guide him through this storm. All right, Jack sighed. I'll keep digging. But we have to be careful, Tracy. If this gets out before we're ready, it could cause a lot of damage. Tracy nodded assent. We'll keep it between us for now. But Jack, promise me that we'll find out the truth, whatever it takes. Jack stared at her determinedly. I promise. Jack and Tracy worked hard for days to learn about Catherine Weaver and the mysterious youngster who may be their brother. Jack perused the private investigator's reports as Tracy contacted old family acquaintances and contacts who could know about their father. Tracy came upon Margaret Sinclair, an old family acquaintance who had worked with their father in the early days of Jebat, one evening while examining records at her desk. Margaret was close to Dad back then, Tracy thought. Maybe she knows something. Tracy called Margaret without hesitation. A friendly voice answered after a few rings. Margaret cheerily shouted, "Tracy Abbott." "My goodness, it's been ages." "Margaret, it's so good to hear your voice," Tracy said, her heart soaring at her old friend's voice. "I was wondering if we could meet sometime soon. There's something I need to talk to you about. It's about Dad." Margaret answered after a brief pause. "Of course, dear. I'd be happy to meet with you. Is everything all right?" Tracy hesitated about how much to say over the phone. "I'm not sure, Margaret, but I think you might be able to help me figure that out." Tracy met Margaret at a small cafe on the outskirts the next day. Margaret had aged beautifully, her silver hair framing a lovely, wise face. Tracy reminisced about earlier days when her family appeared invincible as they sat down. "Tracy, it's so lovely to see you," Margaret remarked warmly, taking her hand. "I've missed our little chats. Your father would be so proud of the woman you've become." The thought of her father broke Tracy's heart, yet she smiled. "Thank you, Margaret. I've missed you too." Margaret looked serious as she leaned forward. "But I can tell there's something weighing on your mind. What's going on, dear?" Tracy inhaled and nervously twisted her ring. "Margaret, I don't know how to say this, but Jack and I have uncovered something about Dad's past, something that we never knew about." Margaret frowned in worry. "What do you mean?" Tracy struggled to express the news. "We've discovered that Dad may have had a relationship with a woman named Catherine Weaver, and there's a possibility that he might have had a child with her." Margaret gasped and clutched her chest. "Catherine Weaver? Oh my, I haven't heard that name in years." Tracy's heart raced. "You knew her?" Margaret nodded slowly, looking away as she remembered. "Yes, I knew Catherine. She and your father were close at one time, but their relationship ended abruptly. I always wondered what had happened between them, but your father never spoke of it again." Tracy spoke urgently, leaned forward. "Do you know if Catherine had a child? Or if there's any chance that this child could be our sibling?" Margaret sighed in discomfort. "I don't know for certain, Tracy, but there were rumors back then. Whispers that Catherine had left town because she was expecting a baby, but no one ever knew for sure. If John knew, he never told anyone." Tracy's heart fell. "So it's possible." Margaret nods. "It's possible, but I don't know what happened to Catherine after she left. She disappeared from Geno City, and no one ever heard from her again." Tracy left the cafe hopeful and nervous. Margaret's statements verified a concern she and Jack had that their father had a child with Catherine. However, without proof, they were in the dark. She returned to Abbott Manor to find Jack in the study reviewing more documents. As she entered, he looked up tense. His voice tired, he asked, "Did you find out anything?" Tracy nods. Margaret knew Catherine. She confirmed that there were rumors about Catherine being pregnant when she left town, but no one knows what happened after that. Jack sighed and stroked his hair. "So we're still at square one. We have pieces of the puzzle, but nothing that definitively tells us where this child ended up, or if they're still alive." Heavy-hearted Tracy sat near him. "What do we do now, Jack? How do we find someone who's been missing for decades?" Jack reclined on his chair, peering at the ceiling for answers. "I don't know, Tracy, but we can't give up. We've come too far to stop now. There has to be a way to find out what happened to Catherine's child." Tracy nodded, determined. "Then we keep searching. We owe it to them, whoever they are, to find the truth." Jack and Tracy maintained their research into Catherine Weaver and the Abbott heir for weeks. They searched old documents, found leads, and interviewed everyone who knew Catherine's life after Geno City. Jack saw Catherine Weaver was mentioned multiple times in a stack of old legal documents from Jabot's early years one evening. Jack frowned and opened the file to study it more attentively. Catherine appeared to have settled a legal disagreement with Jabot shortly after leaving town discreetly. Jack found it weird that the settlement happened around Catherine's due date. Jack's heart raced when he comprehended the implications. Had their father paid Catherine to stay quiet about the child? Did he always know? He hastily dialed Tracy's number, shivering as he waited. "Tracy, I think I found something," Jack quickly exclaimed when she picked up. "There's a legal settlement between Jabot and Catherine from around the time she would have had the baby. It's possible that Dad knew about the child and paid her off to keep it quiet." Tracy's voice was shocked and disbelieving. "Are you saying that Dad knew about the child this whole time?" "I don't know for sure," Jack said, running. "But it's starting to look that way. We need to dig deeper into this settlement, find out exactly what it was about and why it was kept so quiet." As Jack and Tracy investigated the legal deal, additional troubling revelations emerge. Catherine had apparently been given a lot of money to leave Genoa City and leave their father. A confidentiality clause in the deal explains Catherine's disappearance. The most stunning revelation was a sealed letter from their father to Catherine. John Abbott's emotional letter in the settlement file apologized for her sorrow and expressed sadness for their breakup. John recognized the child and hoped Catherine would nurture it lovingly in the letter. He pledged to financially support the child's upbringing, but stated that he couldn't be there owing to his job and family obligations. As Tracy read the letter, her hands shook and tears fell. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew about the child, Jack. He knew all along." Jack glanced at the letter in bewilderment, his heart heavy with truth. Their father, whom they idolized, kept this secret for decades. With a whisper, Tracy whispered, "What do we do now?" Jack scrambled to decide their next action. They knew their father's past, but where was Catherine's child? How would this affect the Abbotts? Jack remarked, "We find them with conviction. We find our sibling and bring them home." After learning the truth, Jack and Tracy immediately began searching for Catherine Weaver's kid. They hired private investigators, contacted old contacts, and pursued every lead. They tried, but the trail was frigid. Weeks passed with little progress, and their father's secret weighed on them. Jack began to doubt everything about his family. How could their father hide something so important? How would this new sibling affect Abbott and Jabbott's future? Meanwhile, Tracy battled her feelings. She always thought their father was honorable and put family first. She felt deceived by the man she idolized. Hope faded as weeks passed. Jack and Tracy were left with more questions than answers after Catherine's child disappeared. After their search seemed to be in vain, Jack received an unexpected call from their private investigator. Investigators found a new lead that might change everything. "Jack, I think I've found something," the investigator explained. "There's a woman in Chicago who matches the description of Catherine's child. She was adopted shortly after birth, and her adoptive parents never told her the truth about her biological mother.